Hey RV family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Necrot record entitled Mortal. Bit of a preface. For whatever reason, I came out of this record with more in-depth thoughts and more notes and just more things I want to talk about than many, so this might be a fairly longer and more detailed review than I usually do, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Be sure to drop a like if you do. New record from these California death metal titans. This is an Oakland trio. They've been rocking the metal underground since the 2010s and have been causing a lot of ruckus with some old school worship and a hell of a lot of gusto. It takes a lot of guts, and this record's not entirely different. Bolt Thrower, Morbid Angel, Death are all influences that you will hear across this entire project. Mortal, however, finds Necrot really coming into their own, becoming their own project and finding even more of their own voice, despite the fact that they do drown a bit in their influences, which is something I will get to as this review progresses. This is only their second studio length, and their very first one got a lot of buzz, got a lot of acclaim, so I don't think it is that odd to say that this 7-track, 38-minute record would have a lot to prove. There was a lot of pressure on their backs to follow it up with a great record. One distinction that must be made, one thing that separates Necrot from other contemporary death metal bands that are playing in the old school vein, is how Necrot really implements these influences to sound like they could very well be from the 80s or 90s. It doesn't really sound manufactured, it doesn't sound fabricated, or like it's just a cheap trend to them. The riffs, the drum playing, the vocals really do feel vintage in how they come off. The same rumble, the same song links, the same album links, the same album art, the same vocal techniques, the same riff writing, the same production style, all rings true for the old school. It's like they're ringing the bells and burying the torch and keeping it alive. This can at times make it feel like they're not really being ingenious with their riff writing. Most of their stuff can come off one-dimensional in the sense of today, but one-dimensional in the sense that it has been so overplayed, and there's been so many other bands that have tainted this formula by just overdoing it and overcompensating and making it feel so fake and making it feel so fabricated and like they're just doing it to play in this old school worship without really having the same electric chemistry and guts that the old school bands did to make their sound feel so primal and so constrictive and so claustrophobic and so dense and impenetrable. Yes, while Necrot isn't doing anything that is boundary pushing or groundbreaking, and there are countless bands that have specific bands that they are pretty much blatantly copying or at least heavily being influenced by, there is something about the way that Necrot plays old school death metal that just draws so many people to it, including myself, even though listening to it as like a critic and as someone that likes to dissect music and look at the finer details and finer points and break it down and try to constructively criticize all of that type of stuff, there is just something that draws me to just how good their records sound. But the place that those critiques are coming from are not out of any sort of spite or ire for the band. I love this band and I love their sound. It's just like there are so many noticeable flaws or noticeable things about their sound that could be improved upon or could be better. It's just they are nitpicks if anything. In general, the parallels can be drawn for days. I think if you want the type of death metal release that is going to be gross, pummeling, scary, and just meant to shock you and feel like a grisly, oozing mess of filth, this is the type of release you want to keep on your radar, and the type of death metal release that only comes around a couple times a year and blows people away. I'm talking about bands like Blood Incantation and bands like Cerebral Rot, bands like Ascended Dead. These bands that come through with this old style but play it in a way that just is so intrinsic. It feels like it belongs. It feels like it's at home. It just, even though it sounds a lot like the other contemporary bands, you can pick apart that record is unique. That record is special, even if the instrumentals or even if the vocal techniques or the production isn't all too different. There is a level of experience and a level of vintage aesthetics that you cannot replicate unless you genuinely have the heart, soul, and passion for the genre that you're playing in. You can pick that apart, especially the more death metal that you listen to, both from the old and the new school. But if you want technicality, if that's your thing, thing, this isn't the record. If you want a super pristine production style for death metal, this isn't your record. If you want riffs galore, if you want fast riffs galore, this isn't your record. If you want vocal dynamics, this isn't your record. If you want long, epic songs, this isn't your record. If you want poetic lyricism that's going to blow you off your feet, this isn't your record. If you want a level of playing that you haven't heard before, this isn't your record. But it is! That's the thing! I mean, Necrot has consistently intrigued me and interested me, and I keep coming back to this record as well as their debut studio length, but when it comes to riff writing, it's always like something somewhat missing. They've never really shook the ground beneath my feet in terms of ingenuity or riff writing or whatever you want to say. It's just more so I like the finalized project. They get praised for how heavy and natural and organic they feel, but I've always been somewhat disappointed by the inner workings, and yet I keep coming back to this. It's like an addiction. I always found myself desiring more from them, feeling like they could do more with their sound, especially on their first full length. And yet, there is something to be said about packing a release full of gusto, rumble, punch, pure grit and rage and aggression and old school playing. These tracks are equal parts Morbid Angel and death, especially the back half just feels so much like death worship. But death worship in the way that feels tasteful, like you're not just spitting on the grave of Chuck and the boys, like you're actually caring about what you're doing, and you're taking that torch and trying to light it for a new generation of death metal that is slowly dying off, but it's these bands that are really keeping it alive that are so good. There are hundreds of releases that I sift through year after year of these new school bands that are playing this strain of old school death metal that just don't have the level of heart that these old bands did into their music, and it's bands like Necrot that keeps that spirit alive. Because sound-wise, this mix, it's pretty standard for the genre. Vocals touched up with a tad bit of reverb, hanging in the backdrop, not too blunt in the mix, not really swallowing it. This was a common practice with old school bands, even with the very raw recording techniques that they use, due to either being in the underground or intentionally trying to be counterculture with a very lo-fi type of recording technique. Twisting angular riffs flying from all directions that breaks with chugginess, and if you pay closer attention to the drums, yes, there are some very great moments from the drums, but they also have this level of flatness that doesn't have the same hard-hitting resonance that a lot of new school bands do. And it's that moment when you realize how desensitized we're coming to with primal recordings, visceral drum work, hard-hitting guitar work, rumbling vocals. We're almost being pampered and we're being spoiled with all of these fancy digitalized recordings that just sound so flawless that they're mechanical. And yes, that is good. There is certainly a place for that, and it sounds wonderful. I enjoy a lot of those bands, but there's something that those records miss the mark on just by virtue of doing it that way. And with the drums, I'm not sure if it's the production that's not doing them the justice that they deserve, or if it's just intentionally the playing. But it's a curious thing, considering at times you'll cycle for moments where they're super present in a track and sound amazing. They sound so fucking heavy and pummeling and grisly, and there's other times when it feels somewhat like an audio clash, or like they're just thumping along and becoming an afterthought to the riffs or to the vocals even, which are much quieter than both the guitars and the drums. While I am digging on the audio quality a great deal, just remember that these are just nitpicks. Necrot's sound puts a really good foot forward of bridging the gap between the old school and the new school without the overproduction of newer bands or the just super lo-fi recordings of some of the 80s bands. I would probably situate them somewhere in the $20 spin lane with bands like Witch Vomit and Tomb Mold. A very dingy and murky recording, not necessarily as despondent and dismal as some of the $20 spin death metal bands can sound, where it's just so much and it's breathing down your neck, constricting you. Necrot really does give themselves a lot of room to breathe, to where it does sound organic, but it also sounds like you could be at a show listening to this and it would be amazing. I know my boy Chanel over at Vital Vinyl Vlogs has seen Necrot live, and I would absolutely love to. I think they would be fantastic to see live. Now, if you enjoyed their first full-length album, that could be a very good thing or a very bad thing for one sole reason that I noticed pretty much unanimously across this record: the similarity. Go back to that record, go to this record, listen to them side by side in their entirety, and tell me that a lot of this doesn't sound very much the same. Going back and forth, they have a lot of the same riffs, a lot of the same vocals, a lot of the same techniques, and of course they're going to still have the same style and flair that they did as a band, because they're a band, they're going to sound similar. But that is one thing that in the long term does worry me with Necrot, is this is only their second studio length album. So are they going to be able to live up to the hype, to live up to the excitement, and continue to craft records that have this old school bite, but still feel original enough to keep drawing people to it in the lane of memorability? That is very worrisome that both of their studio lengths have sound very, very similar. In many ways, this can feel like it's a sequel to said record, so your enjoyment of this record is going to very much come down to whether you like that or not, or if you wanted them to do something new. Necrot is a fantastic band. I could talk about them for a lot, and that's something that I can't say for a lot of death metal bands. I love talking about it, there's a lot to talk about, but not for this long. And Necrot's one of those bands that I think is very important to keep alive, to keep support on, and I think their plays on Spotify, the views on their records, I think that is very much a strong indication and a testament. The amount of old heads that I'm seeing enjoying this record is saying a lot. Purists and elitists that really do love the old school and just cannot tolerate any of the new school, even the $20 spin bands that do play in the old school, these people are enjoying it because they're finding records that keep the spirit alive of the time that they love and the scene that they love. Bands like Necrot are so important because, yes, it is good to have progression as a genre, and it's good to have differences and different technicalities and things like that, but why not have both? You can clearly have both. Let there be a choice, let there be bands to choose from, and it is obvious that Necrot's one of those bands that are sticking out for just how much heart and soul and passion and love they're putting into their craft. Are they the most original? No. Do I have gripes with this record? Hell yeah. Do I have gripes with their first record? Hell yeah. I think Necrot isn't the most technically proficient band, or even the best sounding, but they're one of the best in terms of keeping that old school alive in a genuine fashion that doesn't feel fake or fabricated, and I think that is so important for the scene as a whole, and I just really look forward to seeing how they have some lasting impact and staying power. Really hope they don't give up the ghost anytime soon, and I hope the 2020s are a fantastic decade for them. For me personally, I'm going to be giving this Necrot record a 7 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Necrot record, Mortal? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this record. I would love to discuss it with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.